A new mode of writing. Okay, we're going to shift our focus a little bit. In the back of the room is the anchor chart. We were working with informational text and expository writing. We are going to shift to literary text, okay, and narrative writing. When I was gone last week, okay, I had you read a biography of George Orwell. And what we're going to be doing is working with one of his famous texts, if you look at the screen, Animal Farm. In that biography, it mentioned two of his works that he's very well known for. Animal Farm being one. Anybody remember the other one?
That one.
Yeah, 1984. You might hear reference to like Big Brother. Okay, he's got some common themes. Today, we're not going to talk a lot about what you learned about George Orwell, but we will. Okay, so today is just engaging you in the text, okay, making some predictions, and I have to find out what literary elements and devices you guys remember. Okay, tap into your background knowledge. You will have a test, okay, in a couple weeks over there, and they're not all new words. Okay, so like normal, I'd like you to record these learning targets, and I'd like you to start on a brand new page. Okay, so in your comp book, okay, brand new page. You don't have to erase. You can just draw a line. Today's date. Look behind my desk, November 15th. Up at the top, if you could put George Orwell, Animal Farm. So when I look at your comp book, I know where our work begins. Okay, go ahead and record these three learning targets here. I think it's going to just make it a little bit bigger for you. There you go. Come on, technology. Can you see that, Sasha, in the back? Okay, so the first one, review literary elements that comprise a novel. You're copying that down. Number 2, access prior knowledge about narratives to make predictions about the text. And the third one, discuss the differences and similarities between literary elements and literary devices. So you're all going to finish recording those at different times. The next step is to take a highlighter and highlight the important words within each target. Many of you are now switching to highlighting the key words, academic words within those targets. So review literary elements that comprise a novel. Second one, access prior knowledge about narratives to make predictions about the text. And the third one, discuss the differences and similarities between literary elements and literary devices. So those three learning targets are what, hey, I'm hoping that we achieve by the end of the period and throughout the class. All right, this is the first time in this particular seating arrangement that I'm going to switch you to small groups. Okay, and what I want you to do once you get into your small groups is to discuss the words that you highlighted, what they mean, and remember when you have a discussion, a group discussion, I need you right underneath to track your discussion. What do those words mean? Why are they essential? Okay, and essentially, what are these learning targets? Okay, I wrote them in academic language. I want to make sure that you are understanding what we're doing, okay, before we just keep going on. Okay, so quick review, and I saw some of you kind of looking around. Small groups, we've got the front row here that's just going to turn back. We do groups of 4. That third row, you guys simply turn around, so we've got 3 groups of 4 back there. That row back there, you guys just push your chairs back, okay, and you're going to be a group of 4, but you're missing someone, so a group of 3 today. Haley, you just turn there, and Max, you just move your chair right over there. Okay, a reminder. Okay, I don't want to have to keep repeating because I know, but what should I look for and hear in a small group? Remember, you're moving from think, pair, share, an academic discussion. This one is a little bit more of a risk. Okay, now you have the dynamics of 4 people, and your voice should still be heard. Your voice should not be the only one in the group, okay, that is being heard. Okay, so some of you need to make sure that you put that in check. Some of you need to push yourself out there. And usually in a small group, someone's going to just step up and kind of naturally be the leader. Okay, I just walk around and you guys just make that happen. Make sure everybody has the opportunity to share. So first, discuss what you highlighted. Second, what those words mean, what the targets mean. Capture your discussion right underneath it. So any questions? All right, go ahead and shift to your small group. Give you about 3 to 5 minutes. We'll see how much time you need. Okay. Well, I
The first one I highlighted comprise a novel because that's specific to that that genre or whatever type, and the literary elements. And then the second one I underlined prior knowledge and narratives, and then predictions about the text.
I did literary elements, narratives, predictions, differences, and similarities.
So maybe we could discuss the differences in similarities like a teacher or something.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I highlighted, let's see where my brain is going. I highlighted literary elements because that's the big part of what we're doing inside of the novel. And then for the second, I highlighted prior knowledges and predictions because how you're using your prior knowledge to make the predictions. And then for the third one, I thought differences and similarities were important because that's how you're going to discern the literary elements and literary devices.
Yeah, we just highlighted completely but not as much.
Okay, so what did you
Yeah, elements.
comprise? What's comprise?
Comprise, like, take them all together.
Okay, Riley's going to track some full class discussion. How do I know when I look at your comp books that you are still actively participating? We now go to full class. How do I measure that? What's my evidence? Yeah. Yeah, she said you use a different color. Anthony, what does that mean to you? You use a different color. What?
It's the first when you do it, so whatever you use, it's like your own thinking, and then in different colors, your whole group.
Whole group, and now we're going full class. Okay, so your use of another color will show me that you're still engaged in what we're doing. Okay, still engaged in the learning and adding on to your original thoughts. So you got a small group, and now you've got a group of like 36 people in here that will help add on to understanding these, okay, and our discussion. So we've got 3. Review literary elements that comprise a novel. You can talk about that one. Access prior knowledge about narratives to make predictions about the text. Maybe your discussion is that. Discuss the differences and similarities between literary elements and literary devices. And your notes should be reflective of your learning style. What makes sense to you in terms of your notes? Patricia asked earlier, she's like, oh, we're thinking of a T-chart, what would go on either side? And I said, well, what do you think? And Cody was doing a T-chart, and I said, Cody, what are you doing? And I said, Patricia, it's up to you. You don't have to do a T-chart, okay? Maybe you do. Saw some Venn diagrams, saw some just listed, bulleted information, okay? The note should make sense to you. Okay, who wants to start with any of those? Okay, Patricia.
So I kind of just like put 1, 2, and 3 for what I thought they mean, because there's 3.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said the first one, I thought it was like review our work and like connect it back to the novel, because it said like to comprise a novel, so I thought that was like putting it together.
Good, so comprise means what? So review literary elements that comprise a novel.
Like the elements that put the novel together. And, like,
Good, now do you guys know any of them? Look at that, I said review them. So my expectation is this is not brand new, not everything. My job as your 9th grade English teacher is to build on what you've already learned, because how frustrating would it be to be in a class that, oh my gosh, we've already learned this, we've already done this. So there are literary elements that you walk into class knowing. You guys might not know that term though. Okay, so as a class, can you talk about what are literary elements that comprise a novel? Isaiah, do you know? Let's think about what Patricia was saying. Literary elements that make up a novel.
Like the parts that you put into like, the book to help.
Okay, go, keep going.
Like,
What are the parts?
The beginning of the book, the middle, I guess. Like, I'm not sure what kind of context.
You're kind of going there, and now look at, hands are going up. They're like, oh, I'm thinking I know the terms that she, and you guys will. When you hear them, you'll go, oh yeah, I know those. Okay? So Maya.
Some people use like hooks in the beginning to like bring in the reader.
Okay, so that would be a, if we go down to the third one, a literary, okay, device or technique to use a hook to engage your reader. Anthony?
Is it like the introduction, body paragraphs?
Yeah, we're talking about a narrative. What is a narrative? Up here, I'm just like, oh, you guys know, you should know the word narrative. It's more sophisticated than maybe you've learned in the past, but you have to have that fundamental understanding of that word. You know what I'm talking about, okay, with those. Brady, do you know?
So you're asking like what the elements of a narrative are?
What is a narrative? If you can give me the elements, you can give me what narrative is.
What is story?
Good, so if you stop right there. If you didn't know narrative was a story, write that in your notes. It's a fancy word, narrative. From here on out, you should be, remember, increasing that academic vocabulary. Now he's going to give you a list of, well, it's a story, and now he's going to give you some elements. What are some elements that you know comprise a novel?
You have to have set characters.
Good, characters. See, you're like, oh gosh, I know these characters, what else?
You have to take the setting, you have to go into detail about the characters in the setting. Yeah, and then you have to have a plot, and like the main characters, or I already say characters, but the antagonist and protagonist.
Good, look at all these. Okay, stop right there. You go, really? Now some of you are like, okay, I got these. He said plot. He said characters. He said setting. He said, oh, you got to develop your characters. Maya said, oh, you want to hook your reader. Okay? Hooking is not a literary element, but that is a technique. Okay, Cassidy.
Point of view.
Okay, point of view is one. Can you go a little bit deeper with point of view? What kind they are, or what different perspectives?
There's first person and second person and third person.
Good. First, second, and third. Anyone build on or add more? Dom.
Isn't there the rising action and falling?
Good. What is all that? You guys remember? Okay, the whole this. What is that? What was that? You filled them out last year. I was like, oh, I want to give you what I know it. Do you remember? Plot chart. The literary elements are the plot chart. So write that down. Literary elements. Plot chart. Brayden was giving you some answers. Envision that plot chart. What are the elements that make up that plot chart? The plot chart are the elements that comprise a narrative. Patricia told you comprises to make up. Okay, all of those elements make up a narrative or story. Are there any from your list that you're like, oh, I know some more? Okay, Dylan. Okay, climax, at the top of that plot chart. Max.
Theme.
Theme. You remember what theme means?
The overall lesson you get out of the story.
Good. Where would theme occur on that plot chart? Where do you think it would?
The end.
Okay, why the end?
Because the story ends and it should convey a message.
Should convey a message. Does the writer just reveal the theme at the end? No. Where does a writer start revealing a theme? What do you think, Max? Okay, and where else? Oh, Chris, what are you doing this? What's this?
I was gonna say at the beginning, like the intro.
Right, little bits, all the way through, right?
I was gonna say.
We cannot take the word theme and go, oh, that's gonna be in the beginning part of the story. It will be, but in terms of, like Max was saying, at the end of the narrative, we should go away with, oh, this is the moral or lesson that the writer intended. So oftentimes on the plot chart, it will be down at the bottom and stretch all the way across, okay? Because it's throughout, there's development. It's not, ooh, now I'm gonna write about theme in chapter 32. Okay? It's throughout the entire text.
Do we have to write a theme?
What do you guys think in your background? Do writers explicitly write the theme? What do you think, Olivia?
It's kind of like hidden throughout the whole thing, and the theme, in my opinion, you have to think about what the theme is. It doesn't just say it.
Right.
You have to kind of think about what the author's trying to tell you.
Right. Now, there's one text, like at the end of the moral of the story is, but those are, remember those little, are they fairy tales or?
Fables or something?
Fables, yeah. They'll explicitly say it, but most of them, okay, as they're more sophisticated, you're picking up on details throughout. Okay, Patricia.
Okay, so like difference in like theme and main idea, isn't it like main idea is like what the, per se, like the main character is trying to accomplish, whereas theme is like the overall message of the story?
And how do they tie together?
Like, let's say if it was like a knight trying to defeat a dragon, his goal would be to defeat the dragon, but like the meaning of the story could be like, depending on characters and plot and such, it could be anything from, like, if you work really hard, you could achieve your goal, or something like, anything really that the author puts into the story that he or she wants to convey to their reader.
Absolutely. So the things that happen within the narrative to the character all relate to the character's reacting that way, like she was saying, the knight and the sword and the dragon, blah, blah, blah. That all relates to the character is developing the theme, okay, in the text overall. So are there any other, when you look at the list, any other literary elements that you remember? Literary elements. Saxton? Mood. Okay. Mood is what, Saxton?
Mood is how the author feels.
She's hesitating. She said mood is how the author feels. We've talked about a word in here that relates to informational text. Subtle difference, a lot of people confuse them. Do you know?
And maybe it's the way you're supposed to make the readers feel.
Yes, that's mood. What's the one where it's how the author feels? Isaiah? They said it, didn't they? It's tone, okay? So tone we have in the back, the informational text. Yeah, how the writer feels about, you guys are doing some research on a topic. How the writer feels, their claim about that particular topic and their position, that's tone. Okay? In a story, now we use the word mood. Okay? And the mood is developed how you feel about, okay, the storyline, the text, the characters. Okay, Brady?
Question. Why do I have to have like a deeper meaning in my writing? What if I just wanted to be what I write about?
That is the meaning of your writing.
That it, yes. So it
It
could
doesn't
be.
matter how deep.
Well, because like it's the way you're making it seem.
Because there's stories for children, and there's like stories for like older people or like teenagers. It just depends on who your audience is and who you want to write.
And how deep you want, right. But just the thing she was talking about, the night being, sometimes you have to persevere through huge obstacles to get, that's a theme, that's one. So it's not like hugely deep or, oh, okay, but it is a theme. Yeah, Tom?
Are we getting animal farms today?
No. I know, this is part of it. I'm engaging you. This is super exciting. Wait till you get the text. We'll get it on Friday though. All right, so let's go back up here. Review literary elements. Notice the key word, review. Okay, review. Access prior knowledge about narratives to make predictions about the text. We know narratives are stories. Accessing prior knowledge to make predictions about the text. Anyone want to talk about that one? Okay, Isaiah?
Me and my group were talking, and we said that like another way that we like put it so we can understand it better is that you predict the events of a novel based on your prior literary experiences, so you can develop a more like personal, intimate understanding, so you can connect with the story better and understand it.
And sometimes your predictions are wrong as a reader, and you just adjust. Okay, your predictions could be right. Okay, they're getting little okay, maybe based upon the literary techniques, some foreshadowing or some other things you pick up, okay, and then you verify as you read. Yeah, Kirsten?
From what I remember from like elementary school, when I wrote predictions, it would just be like one sentence long. So what I wrote is that we're gonna learn a more sophisticated way of making a prediction. So if like we look back at it, it's kind of like not just a one sentence thing where you're kind of left with no details about why you think that way. So we're gonna learn how to back it up.
Nice. Okay, so, we've skipped number 3. Discuss the differences and similarities between literary elements, which you guys just talked about. You identified some of them, and literary devices. Okay, so what does that one mean? Maya?
Literary elements are probably like the parts of a narrative, like something that might be in every single narrative.
Here we go, right here. This is your plot chart from before.
And then literary devices is something that may not be in every single narrative, but it's something you could add to a narrative to like spice it.
Spice it up. And someone in the 5th period, yesterday, it was Ryan, said, oh, those literary devices are the options that a writer uses to carry the story, progress the story along. Okay, I like how Maya said to spice it up. They're options, literary devices. So as a writer, I don't have to use this technique. I could though. Literary elements, as a writer, if I'm writing a story, these are the elements that I'm working with. Yes, Haley.
I have a question. Not all stories have to have resolutions, right?
What do you guys think?
No.
Allie, what do you think?
Oh, well, I was raising my hand for something else.
Well, what do you think though? And then we'll come back to what you were, and make sure you have resolution, okay? That's a literary element, and she's talking about, when you say that, what does that mean?
Like if there is a big thing, and like how there could always, how someone could write about a happy ending, but there doesn't always have to be a happy ending kind of thing.
What do you think, Alan? Do all stories have to have,
I think it kind of depends
on what?
on the author and on what the theme of the story is and who the audience is. Because if it's like a children's book, then you don't want to leave it open, you want to finish it. But if it's supposed to be more for adults or there's a certain theme, then maybe they want to leave it with a question at the end.
Yeah, so it could completely depend on the writer and their intent. Nissa? Oh, and then Allie, I remember. Okay, so Nissa, do you want to build on?
Yeah.
Okay, build on, and then Allie, don't let me forget you.
On a lot of books that I've seen, when they don't have a resolution, generally it's because they want you to do it. Like they kind of have a call to action for you to do something.
Oh, it could be a call to action, or it could be what? What's another reason why? Cliffhanger. Isaiah?
Yeah, they leave it on like a cliffhanger so you want to come back and read the next book.
Book in a series, so we've got some techniques. Why would they? Absolutely. All right, Allie, what did you want to say?
I was going to say that we will learn more about the elements and devices individually, learn more about those and how they relate to each other and how they're not the same thing.
Good. Good. Okay, Maya.
I just wanted to give an example of what we were talking about, with no resolution. If anybody ever read Goosebumps books, there were never a resolution and there was never a next story. Well, except for a couple, but what I'm saying is it was kind of to leave you on a cliffhanger but not give you what you want.
Mm-hmm.
It's to keep you thinking about it, I guess, and make up your own ending if you wanted to. It's I guess what I'm trying to say is leave it open to your conclusion. You can.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I agree. Isaiah?
I feel like what Maya is saying is pretty true. Like at the I'm not sure how many people credit, but at the end of the Maze Runner trilogy, they have a whole they went through all of this, and at the end they're at this final this is our last stand, but then the book ends, and I feel like that's kind of the author saying even though we don't really finish it, based on what you've read before about this book and all, you should be able to kind of how we were saying, accessing prior knowledge about narratives to kind of oh well, I imagine that this is what happened to these characters, and then you kind of live with that.
Good. Yeah. Patricia?
Can authors do that for the Maze Runner trilogy and things the Harry Potter trilogy where they have the whole book and then the author later comes out with books that are from before what really
Yes,
happened?
yep, absolutely. Nice. Okay, what I'd like you to do with your partner before we go to the anchor chart, okay, is to, from your memory, okay, we have a list of those literary elements you should in your book. I want you and your partner, okay, we're talking about your table partner, not your small group, to try to recreate that plot chart. Where did the elements fall on that plot chart? Remember, we got this, okay? So take those elements and put them on a chart now. So create it with your partner.
And then the next part is
Yeah, and you remember where they are. Where did they go?
Okay, so we're creating like the whole thing here.
Yeah, we're putting on the
Some of you remembered elements that others were like, ooh, or don't even have it, the discussion didn't occur. But a few of you had some elements that classes yesterday did not. So I know it's in your background, but the term might be, oh, someone has to bring it up and then you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. Okay, so Isaiah, at the beginning, we're talking about that first flat, okay, and then we go up, then we peek, and then this. So the beginning, what did you label?
We put, me and Liz were talking, and we remember that the expedition is where like the very, very beginning where they list like the characters.
Got it? Oh, I know, you're like, oh.
And I think that's what, wasn't it Saxton, I think, who said like, she was talking about tone and mood, and that's where that would fall, like the climate or the mood of the story at the very beginning where it starts.
Good. I see many of you adding on. I want you to add on. Okay, so he just gave you, we remembered at the very beginning, it's called the exposition. Okay, and there are certain things that a writer does in the exposition. He labeled a few things. Okay, I know he did. Can anyone else go, okay, what happens in the exposition? Or at the very, very beginning. Micah.
You put like your tone, your mood, your setting, your genre, the style, and like.
And you introduce?
Accent and the author.
You introduce, oh, she's missing one thing.
And your character.
Character, yeah. So in the exposition, you establish the basic situation. You are giving your reader the setting information, the character's information. It's the introduction, okay, to the plot. We're talking, this entire thing is called a plot chart. You're charting the plot. These are literary elements. Okay, what happens after that exposition? Then we start going up here. What do you guys remember? Caitlin?
Rising action.
Rising action. In the rising action, what occurs in the rising action to keep people wanting to read? You remember? McKenna? Conflict. Add that if you forgot. There has to be, otherwise we want drama. Otherwise, why would we continue reading? Something's got to keep us intrigued. So there's conflict. We've got rising action. Dom.
Wasn't it for the protagonist versus the antagonist? Wasn't the antagonist like man versus animal versus nature?
Good. Man versus self, man versus nature, man versus nit. Okay, now someone in third period, the very first person who talked about protagonists and antagonists, and those definitely should be, okay, on your literary elements, those are characters. The first person who brought those up said, oh yeah, the protagonist and antagonist, it's the good guy and the bad guy. And I'm like, oh, we got to step back, we have to adjust that. What do you guys know about protagonists and antagonists? Noah?
It's not necessarily good guy and bad guy, it's more like the main character and the opposition to the main character.
Which one's the main character?
Main character is the protagonist.
Good, protagonist. And I like how he said with the antagonist, it's the opposition to the protagonist, the antagonist is. So we could have a character that goes in opposition, or we can have some abstract idea. Okay, like our character is facing, our protagonist is facing racism within his community. That's the antagonist. Doesn't have to be a character. There could be, absolutely. Okay, so that's, wait, Isaiah has one more thing. Go, Isaiah.
I have a question about like, so like the reason that protagonist and antagonist.
You guys want to go to lunch and then you can ask?
Yeah.
Keep your questions. Okay, we left right before we went to lunch, talking about literary elements, okay, creating a plot chart, and then Isaiah was going to make a comment or ask a question, and you guys decided as a whole, oh, can you hold it? We'll start with right after lunch. Okay, so Isaiah, do you remember
was gonna ask something about the protagonist and the, oh yeah, it's like,
Hold on just a second, I didn't make sure everyone's listening. Okay, go ahead.
the antagonist isn't always the enemy because of how like when you think of the story, there's always two sides. Isn't it because of like perception? Like, even though I might think that racism is a bad thing, there's people on the other side who see it as a good thing.
Ooh, that's interesting, huh?
Based on perception.
Based upon perception.
Because there's not always something set. Like in like World War II, the Nazis and the Third Reich thought they were doing the right thing, but then everyone else was like, no, that's bad, you can't. But it was all, they're still good and bad guys, but like they're both at the same time.
Interesting point. Interesting point. I like that. All right, so we're going to go to the anchor chart. Many of the terms you currently have in your book, and you've created a plot chart. If there's something that I put up on the chart that you don't have, you need to make sure that you add it. Okay, you might find it on the plot chart. You might not find it on the plot chart, because if we go back to that third learning target, we want to talk about the differences and similarities between literary elements and literary devices. And our discussion was pretty heavy with literary elements. Literary devices, we kind of picked just a little bit. There's lots of different strategies. The techniques that I'm going to put up on the board are not comprehensive. It's not like every single technique a writer could use, but there's some of them. Okay, so we're going to start with the purpose. Okay, you should have in your book that narrative writing is considered literary text. Okay, so that's the beginning. So we need to make sure that we make the shift from expository writing is informational text, and narrative writing is literary text. So we talk about narrative being story. Yes?
Are we writing this in pencil or the different color?
You write it in your original, okay, color. All right, so we're going to talk about, in the back there, we talked about the purpose. Okay, so the purpose of a narrative, there's lots of them. What do you think the basic purpose of someone, an author who's writing a narrative? What is it?
To tell a story.
There you go. It's to tell a story. Now we could argue, oh, to make money, to entertain, blah, blah, blah. The list can go on, okay? But that's a primary purpose, to tell a story. So if I ask you to write a narrative, I'm asking you to tell a story. We go into types. So types of narratives. So a narrative can be nonfiction. Who knows what that means? Nonfiction. Max? Factual. Yeah. So it's based upon real events, a real person, and that there's a story in it, maybe like a documentary. It can also be, narratives can also be fiction, which would be the opposite. Okay, so real, okay, and totally make-believe. We've got short stories, so they don't have to be complete novels. They can be shorter in text. Poetry can have narrative elements in it. Okay, oftentimes people are drawn to poems because of the narrative elements, especially performance poetry. Okay, and then we've got the word a book or novel. One thing I should have or would have added is the term novella. Novella. Anyone have an idea what a novella might be? Caitlin?
It's like a, kind of show days of our lives. It's kind of like a story. It's a story. It's made up.
What's the difference between a novella and a novel? Go. Shorter. Okay, Animal Farm is a novella. So can you add that, and I'll make sure I get a term to add to the chart. Novella. So the word novel, and then add an LA.
Isn't that Spanish?
I think so, yeah. So novella is a short but complete novel. Animal Farm is a novella. Anyone have any idea why we would be reading Animal Farm at this point in the year? Any ideas? And this is really like a lot of conjecture. Noah, do you know?
Well, one, to learn about literary texts, and two, we're learning about the Russian Revolution.
There you go. How did you know that Animal Farm? Did I say it, or did Hopkins, or? Both? Okay, so Animal Farm, one of the techniques that we're going to put on the chart is an allegory. Okay, and I'll put that up on the chart, but Animal Farm is an allegory. An allegory is a story that symbolically represents a time in history. So as we read Animal Farm, it's a novella. We'll check out the book on Friday for you guys, the last 30 minutes of class. You're going to see the book, and it's not really big, and half of it is just supplemental information in the back, poems and additional readings. Animal Farm is a complete novel within 10 chapters, and they're not really long chapters as well. Okay, so it's a short novel that's considered an allegory. Everything in Animal Farm parallels the Russian Revolution. However, you will not see Russian Revolution, those terms mentioned at all in the text. You will not, who are some of the key players in Russian Revolution? Max? Tsar Nicholas. His name is not in there, okay? V.I. Lenin. Name never appears. Stop. Good, so now if this is an allegory, however, Russian Revolution is not mentioned, Stalin's not mentioned, okay? V.I. Lenin's not mentioned, how do we know, how would the writer create, okay, the text that would symbolically represent, what do you think? Okay, what does that mean though?
It's typing real people or things with other things.
Okay, he's on it, Kirsten?
Well, I was gonna say, using satire.
Yeah, the whole text is satire. What is satire?
It's like expressing your opinion on a certain thing. There's a second part to it, but I don't remember.
Yeah, it's usually a criticism.
Yeah.
Okay, so George Orwell, we'll talk more about him as a person because you guys have a little bit of background from that biography I had you read, but he is critiquing systems of government. He is critiquing people, humanity overall, and the text itself was written to parallel the Russian Revolution. However, as we start reading it, you'll see parallels to today as well. So it's timeless, okay? The novel is timeless in terms of its concepts, themes, okay, that are developed. Okay, so in terms of techniques, narrative techniques, again, this list will not be including every single thing. You might be able to come up with some additional ones. But techniques are use of figurative language. It appeals to a reader. Some figurative language is the use of metaphor or an extended metaphor. What is a metaphor? Noah?
Comparing two unlike things.
Yeah, so can you give an example?
Like, well, my room, I don't know.
Who's got one? Because I just put him on the spot. Dom?
It's raining cats and dogs.
It's raining cats and dogs. It's not literal, that's figurative language. Max? Killing two, that's a cliche, like a common expression. What about her cheeks are what?
Red.
Roses, that's a real common, easy one that I think I may have used before. Her cheeks are roses. Comparing her cheeks to roses, not literally. Roses are not on her cheek. Nissa, why would I say that then? They're red, what else could it represent?
Washing.
So what am I asking Nissa to think about? Other than, oh, roses are red, not all of them. What else? Why am I pushing her to what else could that mean? Why would someone write, okay, her cheeks are roses? What are they trying to get us to think about?
To think about a deeper meaning or what her cheeks can, I guess, represent.
Represent, which is the allegory, which is Animal Farm. Everything will be representing something else. We could read the text and completely understand the plot, the characters, the setting, all that plot chart of George Orwell's Animal Farm. We can totally get it and not know that it's an allegory. That symbolic representation of each character being a character of an actual person in history could totally go over your head. You can still understand the text. You'll have a deeper, Braden, please stay with me, a deeper understanding if you understand, oh, these are the actual people in the Russian Revolution. This was Orwell's intent. Can you figure out kind of like a puzzle? Who represents who, okay, in that time period? Okay, another literary technique that you might know of is foreshadowing. Another technique that Orwell uses is personification. All the animals on the farm are personified. Yes, they can think, they can act, they are just like people, okay? It's all figurative language. The use of imagery is a technique. These things are options that a writer could use, doesn't have to use. Okay, lots of different options. Characterization is considered a technique. There's direct and there's indirect characterization. So you guys said characters are part of the plot chart. They're part of the exposition. We're introduced to a character. What does characterization mean then? If it's a technique that a writer uses. Maya.
Like building the character on like using like what they wear or what they do, what they say.
Good, so in terms of characterization, there are options from the writer that I could choose to use, I don't have to. Okay, I can choose to characterize my character directly or indirectly. Ryan, do you want to add anything on?
Well, you can sort of like build on the characters with their thoughts and dialogue.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's a technique. Dom?
You can use unhuman characters or like unlike
We can do this, all of this to create our character, which is what George Orwell does. Okay, let's play with direct versus indirect just a little bit. So I'm going to, in your notes, I want you to write this down. I'm going to give you a sentence that's an example of direct characterization, and I want you to turn it into indirect characterization. It's not going to be a beautiful line or anything, but everyone write down in your book and label this direct characterization. Direct characterization. I'm writing a novel, talking about a character, and I say, she was shy. Go ahead and write that. She was shy. That's considered direct characterization. Can anybody, before I tell you, anybody tell me why? Isaiah?
Maybe it's because it's referring directly to someone.
What does that mean?
She.
What else is direct in that sentence? Haley?
You're just straight up saying.
Just straight up saying. As a reader, you don't have to think about anything. She was shy. Okay, so you know that about the character. I want you now to turn this into indirect characterization. I do not want you to use the word shy. So I want you to write a few sentences that shows that the character is shy, but do not use the word shy. You are going to be using the techniques that Maya talked about, and I think Ryan as well. What would a shy character be thinking? How would they be behaving? Put the character in a classroom, okay, just so it's a little bit quicker. So we've got a girl in the classroom, she is shy. Show some characterization without using the word shy. Just a couple sentences. Who's willing to share a line? It doesn't have, like, it's not going to be a beautiful piece of writing, but we're trying to go from direct to indirect. So what do you have to do as a writer? Go.
When he tried to introduce himself to a new student, she slowly looked up and looked back down and waved.
Absolutely. I, as a reader, have to do what with that text compared to she was shy? What does the reader have to do with that? Olivia? Think and use what skill?
Context clues.
Context clues, inferences. I have to make an inference based upon that. Oh, I think she's shy. Dom, go.
She was nervous when the guest came over.
Good. Riley.
I said she was hiding her emotions behind her blue eye.
Good. Braden.
Sarah's old school was filled with all her friends. Now everything's changed. She sits in the back of the class waiting for somebody to talk to.
There you go. So all of that. Okay, that's an example of literary technique, which is called characterization, moving from direct to indirect. Most writers will do a combination, okay? Because we don't, as a writer, if it's all direct, what would happen to us, you think, as a reader? It's boring. Okay, it's all just given. There's no thinking, there's no, ooh, what's going on here? Okay, so usually it's a combination of direct and indirect. Okay, another technique is hyperbole. Anyone know hyperbole?
Yes.
What is it, Noah?
An extreme exaggeration.
Extreme exaggeration. Okay, so if you don't know hyperbole, along with the word, write down exaggeration. I don't have to, as a writer, use hyperbole. I could, if I wanted to. It's a technique. Okay, I could use flash back. I could also use a flash forward. So playing with the sequence of events or time in the text. I don't have to, okay, but I could use that technique. Another technique is the use of dialogue. Okay, a lot of writers use dialogue to create a character, but it is considered a technique. I don't have to use dialogue, okay, when I'm writing a narrative. It's a choice. Okay, now when we go into the organization, these are things that should appear on your plot chart. So you're not going to write them down unless you don't have them on your plot chart. So these are the ways to organize a story. We're talking about a plot chart, which is an overview of our sequence of events. A plot, it's a sequence of events. First this. We know the exposition, okay, happens at the beginning, but we're talking about the plot overview. That's why it's called a plot chart. A story will have a narrator. The narrator could be a character in the story, doesn't have to. Sasha, what's a narrator? Yeah, they're going to tell you the story. Okay, they can participate in the story, or they can be non-participant. Okay, that's your choice as the writer. The exposition, you guys told me about that. That's at the very beginning. The exposition will establish the setting. And Saxton said, oh, that goes in the setting. They're going to give us some atmosphere, which correlates with the mood of the text, how we're supposed to be feeling about the situation. In the exposition, the writer will also introduce characters to us. And you guys told me, oh yeah, we've got in the characters the protagonist and the antagonist, and we clarified if you have the misconception of the good guy, bad guy. But that we also, Isaiah pointed out, there could be a blurring depending on the perspective of the reader. Okay, so we've got the main character and the opposing character or opposing force is the antagonist. All stories have conflict. And I'll move the conflict up here so you can see a little bit better. Okay, conflict, but we're talking about the rising action here. There can be internal as well as external conflict. And I'm talking about a character. How does a character have internal or external conflict in a text? Okay, go.
Wouldn't internal be like problems with yourself?
How do you have a problem with yourself, Noah?
Well, I guess an internal problem would be like a problem that you have with maybe another person, or another person has a problem with you. As external would be like a physical problem or like a bullying issue.
So the problem with another person could also be internal. It could also be external. How? Isaiah?
Maybe like a problem with another person that's external is like one person wants, so say you had, like you and your friend found $5,000 randomly, right? And the problem is your friend wants to donate it on a charity, but you want to keep it all for yourself, and you have a conflict between the two of you as to what you're going to do.
Good, that's external, that's outside of your control. How do we make it internal?
Maybe like you're planning on stealing it from him, but you're not sure if your morals are like, oh, should I really take it? That kind of.
And how would the reader know that conflict within you?
I guess the author could put it like in a first-person point of view. They could speak as your character.
Okay.
And stay like obviously they illustrate whatever they're trying to say in the story.
Think about conflicts that you guys have throughout the day that are internal. Nobody else knows about them. Where do they occur? In your brain, okay? So as a writer, if you want your character to have conflict and internal conflict, you're going to use that dialogue, that internal thinking. So it's a glimpse into the reader's problems that are within the character. External, outside of the character. You guys know that there is resolution, okay, at the end of the story. And Max brought up, we've got the central idea, or what's called a theme in a literary text. We talked about earlier that being developed throughout the entire narrative and not just, oh, we're at the end now, so what's the theme? Most of the time it's not explicit, it's embedded in the text. But there are, like the fairy tales or the fables, okay, and the moral of the story is, and it'll be right at the end. So if we go back to one of the targets in terms of what's the difference and similarities between a literary technique and a literary element, okay, I want you to think about that and just have a real quick conversation with your partner. The difference and similarities between a literary element and a literary technique. If I had that as a question on the quiz, how would you answer it? So talk with your partner.
Things that are put inside a certain type of literary device. So it's like if it's narrative, you use the that go along with narrative writing. Also non-fiction, like summaries. There's different elements to a summary rather than like it has like a certain like it has details. So it's non-fiction. So that would be how to organize these different techniques and how what type you write with.
The devices is more
The plot.
Okay, let's go full class.
You set those things up.
Full class discussion before we go to
Dialogue was a good device, you could use dialogue.
committing anything to your comp book. Let's make sure, just for accuracy, okay, kind of calibrate here. So, if I were to ask you on a test, what's the difference or similarities or similarities of a literary technique or device and a literary element, how might you answer that? Okay, Dylan.
The elements, like a literary element is kind of like built in. You have to have it in there for it to be narrative or whatever you want it to be. But,
Excellent. Can you give me some examples?
So
That have to be in there.
it can't be like just stated facts in the narrative writing. That's one of the things that it can't be. Or you have to tell a story.
Okay, and what are those elements in a story?
All of those things.
All of
right
those
there.
things, yeah. Now, can you list them without looking? Who can give me a few without looking in your notes? Literary elements have to be in a story, Dylan said. So what has to be in a story? Allie? Good, what else? Good, what else?
Conflict.
Good, what else?
Exposition.
Exposition, setting, characters, all of those are literary elements. Go to literary techniques now. Braden.
Literary techniques are the things that make your writing better and give more details that make it writing.
Absolutely. Can anyone add on? Maya.
Literary techniques are things that are optional to put in your text.
That's the key. Yes, they're optional. I, as a writer, do not have to use a flash forward. I don't have to in a story. These, I have to if I'm writing a story. These are the literary elements. They have to be in there. That's what Dylan was saying. These have to be in here. Literary techniques, and remember there's more. These are literary devices that a writer can use. They're options, okay, based upon the style, the purpose, lots of different things. So questions about that? Please add to your notes if you're like, ooh, okay, kind of capture your thinking right now, literary elements, literary devices, or techniques. Okay, jot some things down. When you are done, I handed out a worksheet for each of you, so I'd like you to get your copy and put your first and last name, today's date, okay, and okay, so let's go to this worksheet. And someone in fifth period, it actually was Casper, and in fifth period, when we started working with this, she's like, oh, this is like a puzzle. Okay, it's really cool. So it is kind of like a puzzle. Okay, you are going to start it, but we only have 6 minutes, and then I want you to finish it outside of class. We're going to start fourth period on Friday with this. Okay, so here's we're talking about that second literary target with the predictions. There was one thing, third and fifth both, as they started working on this, my directions were not clear enough, so I need to make sure that you understand all the directions before I just assume you go out. So let me read them, okay, and then answer some questions and tell you the one thing that kind of messed up with the kids, because it's not written on here real clear. Okay, so here's your directions. Read the quote and highlight the most important words. There are 4 quotes on the front, 4 quotes on the back. They're all important quotes from Animal Farm. Next, predict the correct sequence of events by placing the number in the prediction box. You have 8 quotes total. So in that box that says prediction will be a number. If you think that quote occurs first out of the 8, you put a number 1. If you think it's the second thing that happens in the plot, you put a number 2. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Remember, we've got 8 total. So your job is to try and figure out the storyline based upon really significant quotes in the text. The other box that I have here says explain your thinking. That's where you go back and you reflect on what words did I highlight, because you're saying they're significant, which will really help you kind of decode, okay, this plot chart, is what you're doing. So that's where you explain your thinking in terms of why you placed it where you did. Think about the elements, literary elements, and think about that plot chart. So here's the first one. Some of the animals remembered, or thought they remembered, that the 6th commandment decreed, no animal shall kill any other animal. And though no one cared to mention it in the hearing of the pigs or the dogs, it was felt that the killings which had taken place did not square with it. So your first job is to read the quote and highlight the words that you know, ooh, this one's significant, this one. You play with diction, word choice. Then you're going to read the 7 other quotes. And as you read them, you'll highlight, and you're going to get a sense, your brain's going to get a sense of what's going to come first, second, third, that sequence of events. It's a prediction, so it's okay to be wrong. Has anyone in here read Animal Farm? Okay, so we're all on the same playing field here. You're making a prediction based upon your background knowledge of narratives in the past, trying to put these in the correct sequence of events. This will be part of another thing that we're going to do on Thursday before we actually read the text. Okay, we're going to do some observations of some images. You and your partner, your table partner, will be competing against everyone else in the class in terms of your prediction, okay, of the novel and how things go through. So at this point, because we only have 3 minutes, you're going to start this individually. You're going to need to walk out with this to finish it. And then at the beginning of class on Friday, after we do the little review of the vocab, I'll have you and your partner discuss it. You can make any changes. So if Max put something in a different order than Sierra, they can discuss it and they can change the order. But I need you to go through, make the predictions, highlight the significant, and explain your thinking is real important as well. Anybody have questions?